Good morning, everyone. It's time to start. John Nicon is going to talk about the other Greece. This is a very eclectic program here, this Saturday Matters, and I am not sure what he's going to talk about, which is mostly the case. We don't know, and I don't know, but I do know it is about that country that invented, if you'll pardon my language, democracy. Do we all have times when we wish we could just get up and go away somewhere else? I think this is a good chance. Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Thank you.
Tell us.
Welcome, all of you. And I'm always intimidated a bit because so many of you have been to Greece, so many of you have experiences there, have made presentations that go beyond what I'm able to do. Greece, the key thing about Greece is its location. It really spans between Europe and the Middle East. So it's a crucial location. Plus, I don't know, we get a lot of feedback. Can you
move the mic?
Move the mic. Just move the mic a bit.
When you lay it on the table, Karen.
Karen, it's the
Move
one mic
and put it on
down.
the table.
Is that the one? Are we okay now?
Turn the lights down.
Because of its location, of course, historically, Greece has so much to offer. Not only the early days of the philosophers, but then during World War II, when it was occupied by first the Italians, who weren't very good fighters, they were more lovers, then by the Germans. The Greeks fought them off successfully, but then followed a horrible civil war where you had relatives fighting against relatives. It was a horrible time. Now it's a little bit different. As I told somebody else, you have to listen to this one carefully. The first donuts were also fried in Greece. Did you know that? Think about it. So part of this goes back to 2007. That's a lot of years back, and a lot of things have changed. So some of you have been there since that time, and so what I'm talking about will be based on the experience at that time. From May 2nd to 24 of 2007, I traveled with my family to Greece. This was our 5th trip there, but the first since Greece entered the European Union and since the Olympics of 2004. The following are some of my impressions and suggestions for those considering travel to Greece. Most tourists, especially Americans, fly into Athens and after a few days there, explore the Peloponnese or Delphi and visit an island or two. Usually Santorini or Mykonos are the most popular. This is the typical itinerary for most package tours as well. While this approach will give one a quick picture of modern Greece, it will not show you the infinite variety of topography and geographical beauty that exists there. Nor will it give you a true feeling of the spirit that permeates this country. Just as small towns in the U.S. differ from larger cities, small towns and villages in Greece are very different from the larger and popular cities and popular islands. Before the European Union, Greece was often described as the richest poor country in the world. Most Greeks lived rather simple lives and depended on extended families for their support. Property was never sold, just passed on to younger family members. The Western competitive style was not theirs. While incomes remained low and prices have increased, there are indicators of prosperity everywhere. The infrastructure is vastly improved, the air is cleaner, there are more and more new cars on the road, people eat out almost every night. Young people are up way until the morning with little apparent care or concern. With some exceptions, water supply and quality and sewer facilities are not up to American standards. You do not flush the toilet paper down the toilet. Even remodeled bathrooms with beautifully decorated tile work may have only squatters instead of toilets. Tap water might be used for bathing, but most cities and in the more arid parts of the country, it cannot be used for drinking. Hotel rooms are small and bathrooms much smaller than the U.S. If the U.S. travelers expect efficiency, and attention to detail, Greece may not be the country to visit, where that level of service will be very expensive. So I'm going to keep talking a lot while you look at this. Greeks accept responsibility for themselves. Children frequently play unaccompanied by adults in congested areas. Pedestrians do not have the right of way. Traffic congestion can be intense, complicated by narrow streets and a mix of small 2-, 3-, and 4-wheel vehicles. Government services from the European Union are increasing and have helped to improve roads, etc. However, safety regulations, workers' protective gear, and proper public sanitation care are still a bit foreign to the Greeks. Remember, the Greeks are independent and proud people. They don't like to be told what to do, nor have limitations placed on their actions. One is expected to deal with the weather, traffic problems, etc. by themselves. No one will do it for you. On the other hand, the pace of Greece has some real advantages. People, their relationships, and their conversations are much more important than getting things done. Filling your gas tank, ordering a meal, or making a purchase in a store is much less important than the conversation preceding or following the transaction. One time, while purchasing gas, the attendant put the nozzle of the filler just as a friend honked and stopped at the station. Well, the conversation began about family, the weather, political situation, and everything else. Well, the gasoline transaction waited. Once the conversation was over, the tank was filled. Moral? Do not be in a hurry while in Greece, and be prepared to linger a little longer. Generally, Greeks are friendly, but self-centered and not necessarily courteous, but willing to do those little extra bits of service Americans might expect. So, about my trip. You might want to use this map of Greece to follow along. We flew from Seattle through Amsterdam and Northwest and KLM to Athens. The new Venizelos airport is a wonderful, especially compared to the older airport in Grifada. A €30, 25-minute cab ride took 4 of us on the new freeway into town. What an improvement. Better than US freeways, but then it's new. We stayed overnight in Athens at €98 with breakfast and found us right in the center of town. This is probably, at the time, was the average to low fare for rather basic hotels in Athens, in the downtown area. We were back at the airport early the next morning for our flight on Olympic Airlines to Leros, a small island in the Dodekanes chain close to the coast of Turkey. Leros is known best for a mental hospital, prison, and strategic military location. My father lived there from birth to the age of 11. Rocky, arid, and slow-moving best describes Leros. Vacationers here are mostly Greeks with families or homes on the island. It is not a major tourist destination. But the people are very friendly and hospitable here. As in the rest of Greece, new structures are sprouting everywhere. There is a lot of European and Greek American money being spent here for summer homes. This is the island of Leros itself. We stayed at a Bulafendi's bungalows place. This was off-season. We're looking at May. Off-season. Usually the Greeks don't vacation until August, the hottest time of the year, and then they all go at the same time. So, shoulder season visitors are mostly from Germany and Northern Europe. Our visit here was primarily to meet friends and a few relatives. There are many lesser-known, less crowded islands which offer very reasonable rates at newer facilities. However, do not expect high-class service. This is a view of the island of Leros and the town from above. And the castro, or the castle on Leros. Every island or town seems to have a castle sitting on the highest point. This is well, not a particularly easy walk, but it's well worth the walk. In Leros, we visited family in homeland. The one picture you see on the left, the third from the left is my father, who visited there in 1959, his first trip back after leaving at the age of 11. Picture on the right which was some of the same family members a couple decades later, with me in the middle, and Joann sitting in the front, our daughter way over on the left. And this was a family that we befriended. It was my father's grade school friend's brother, and we communicated with them and still keep in touch. Anyway, that's Laros. The Greek hospitality from these people was amazing, and this is a typical scene where the whole family gets together and fills the table with food and wine and frivolity. After Laros, we were back in the mainland and chose to visit the Nicon Museum in Athens. The Nicon collections comprise many distinct categories, totaling more than 30,000 items, illustrating the Greek world through a spectacular historical panorama. One of the fighters for freedom, Leftherios Venizelos, in World War II, was a hero to the Greeks. My father had a large picture of him, and in fact donated that picture to the museum. Aside from the Parthenon, the next place, if you haven't seen this, is Lykavitos. It's higher than the Acropolis, but a bit more difficult to reach. A funicular takes you the last few hundred feet if you choose not to climb the switchback path. The 360-degree view of Athens from there is unsurpassed. Driving in Athens is for the confident and aggressive types. If one cannot adapt that role behind the wheel with a standard transmission, then take a cab. Roads between major cities are wonderful. Many are new freeways that cut through mountains with tunnels and bridges, so you never have to turn the wheel. We headed west across the Corinth Canal to visit friends there. We found a rather seedy hotel just west of Corinth near a friend's village. Most hotels outside of Athens or Salonika have either do not open till the 1st of June or have limited service. The next day we continued west across the new bridge at Rio and Antidio. Previously, this new bridge crosses the merge point between the Corinth Gulf and the Patriarchos Gulf, connecting the mainland of Greece with its huge peninsula, the Peloponnese. When we went there the first time, there was a ferry boat. And if you ever see Greeks trying to get on a ferry boat, it's a whole scene. There are no lines. Everybody rushes at the same time, whether you're with a car or on foot. But this bridge was a fantastic accomplishment. Officially, the Chari-Laos Trikoupis Bridge is one of the world's longest multi-span cable-stayed bridges and the longest of the fully suspended type. It opened one day before the Athens 2004 Summer Olympics on August 12, 2004, and was used to transport the Olympic flame. Before now, only ferries tried to cut the two land masses together along this stretch of coast. Now, for a 10-euro charge in 2007, drivers can easily make the crossing. Loading and unloading on the old Greek ferries, as I said, is another story unto itself. I speak of the other Greece because these are places that you're not as familiar with, perhaps. And now, the other Greece to me is the part of northern Greece, which as we go on, I think you'll see is very different. Our destination today was Avariko, a small village that was the home to my mother's family. Climbing the ridge from Antidio to the lush valley south of Agrinion was a marvelous drive and portent of things to come. Thermo lies in the mountains east of Agrinion, just north of our destination. There we lunched under a shady pine tree, and climbed farther into the mountains. Vistas are equal, if not better, than the green hillsides of the Washington Cascades. This scene on the left is Avariko. As you can see, it's pretty green. And if you look on the right, the scene on the right is my mother's family's home, as it was when we saw it the last time. One lone taverna exists in Alpha Rico. We found some people who knew of the Chaco's home. A few minutes later, we stood in front of the crumbling remains of the small stone structure. It was a very emotional time for our family. Excuse me. Rather than double back to Aguinio for the main road, we took a suggested new route north from Paravula to Carpenisi through the mountains. The only thing about this route was that it was paved, twisty, yes, and beautiful, truly. We passed a lone monastery perched on the hill at Prusos. How they built these monasteries in some incredible locations always astounds me. We arrived at Carpenisi the next day, the next afternoon. This is heralded as the Switzerland of Greece because of its terrain and location plus skiing facilities. We found the Helvetica Hotel, appropriately as Helvetia, Switzerland, on the main street and were greeted warmly by the owners. The next morning, we began early through the mountains into beautiful Spirchios Valley to Spirchiada, the home of Joann and Helen's mother. It was interesting because we didn't know where the family home was. And as we were walking along, we saw this gentleman walking with a cane. And we said, "Could you tell us where the Tilifonis home is?" Tilifonis, he said, "Ego είμαι Tilifonis. I'm a Tilifonis." He happened to be at my mother-in-law's wedding many, many years ago in Greece. So we were there. This is where the home used to be. Interestingly, towns are spelled many different ways on maps and in books. With all the recent road improvements, maps and atlases may be badly out of date. Even the ELPA, Greece's AAA affiliate atlas, was found wanting. However, I guess I got ahead of myself. Yeah, I got a little bit ahead. In this photo, the freeways were well marked with very few interchanges. Tolls were just a couple of euros and toll booths were rather infrequent. While the speed limit is 120 kilometers, about 70 miles per hour, we were frequently passed by other vehicles. At this point, we're heading north from Greece towards the town of Salonika, Thessaloniki. We would consider an overnight stop at the beach area just east of Katarini and pulled off to see the area. Wow. What might have been a quiet beach area had turned into Atlantic City wannabe. We later learned that this is a major destination for Eastern European, Russian, and Ukrainian visitors. Several rather cheap-looking casinos border the road to the beach. We were glad not to have stayed here. Thessaloniki in northern Greece, major town, the home of the Almos, if you didn't know that.
Yes, I do.
Arriving in a busy city at 5 p.m. on a Friday afternoon is not recommended. Greece's second largest city is no exception. There are no left turns from the main street, and our hotel was on the left side. Lucky I was only honked at and yelled at twice until I found a way to reverse my route and get to the hotel. Now, this is a business hotel with underground parking, and it served us well. We were fortunate to have an acquaintance in Thessaloniki who took us on a great driving tour that evening. This city, with its strategic location and deep port for trade within countries to the north, it has been compared to Seattle as it arches around the bay and rises to the mountains to the north. While green and lush in some areas, development has eliminated much of the foliage. This tour was much better than a city tour, as we had considered for the next day. and it allowed us to locate a few attractions we wish to visit. Two unique churches in Salonika, Agios Dimitrios and Agios Sophia. And the next day we visited the Jewish Museum. Originally we had planned to stay in the city and take side trips to attractions. However, at the suggestion of our host and some others, we left Salonika the next morning. The Jewish Museum is unique because there were so many Sephardic Jews that ended in Salonika. There are stories during World War II of the Greeks hiding Jewish artifacts, their prayer shawls, their prayer rugs, their readings, and keeping them hidden while the Jews were under siege by the Germans. The relationship between the Greeks and Jews was very strong, and to this day remains strong. I remember as a youngster, my father would take us to visit a lot of Jewish families, and I couldn't figure out why we were doing that until they were all speaking Greek. And then it made sense, because they were all from either Rhodes or from other locations in Greece. Side story, there were a couple Jews that were in the area of Marmara near Constantinople or Istanbul who wanted to come to the States. They wanted to come to New York because they heard it was such a big, wonderful city. They happened to run into a Greek from Seattle who we later learned was the name Pantages, a familiar name of the Greek theater mogul. Pantages told these guys, hey, don't go to New York, come to Seattle. Seattle's green, lush, it's got mountains, water, everything you need. Those two were the first families that came to Seattle. Of the first families, the Calvos and the Polycars. Both families who were very successful in the Seattle area. The other family that came from Greece, from the island Rhodes, was the Alhada family. The Alhadas are equally famous for their role in the Seattle area. Anyway, we left Thessaloniki for Chalkidiki. Chalkidiki is a three-peninsula area that juts out into the ocean, to the sea. We didn't know where to go here. We knew that one of these is a home to Mount Athos, which is a major installation of monasteries. But for the next day, we spent 3 days in the town of Vurvoru. This place wasn't even open yet. But the picture in the middle shows it as it's been revised today. On the left, you'll see where it comes to the water. And on the right is a picture that I took where we sat very comfortably. This small area is not really a village, but a stretch of summer homes. We're now in the middle peninsula, or the lower peninsula of Chalkidiki. It's a stretch of homes on the east side. Wait a minute, I got it wrong. We're on the middle finger. When we got there, the family was just opening it for the season. The kitchen wasn't open yet, but 2 small markets were nearby. We watched the slow process of building a pool bar, sat on the beach, enjoyed the shade of lovely garden, and did little more. Our biggest adventure was going to one of 2 tavernas for lunch or dinner. There are a number of developed resorts with large hotels in Chalkidiki. Tourists flock to them in the summer months. Choices are legion. However, for privacy and quiet, the east side of the middle finger of the peninsula was best for us. From here, the third finger, Uranupoli, Mount Athos is successful only by boat. And visits to the many monasteries there are for men only. This is only a small portion of the myriad of monasteries in Mount Athos. Our next journey took us to Veria, about 2 hours west of Thessaloniki. This town sits at the opposite end of a beautiful valley from Salonika. Veria is a pleasant, mid-sized city with a wonderful Byzantine museum, an old mill, and the altar where St. Paul spoke. Ours was a one-night stay at a hotel there, right on the main street where one can enjoy late-night activity that is Greece. Young people sipping coffee, other beverages, deep conversations until late morning. Older men in cafe-neons, drinking coffee, playing backgammon, and street kiosks with newspapers, cigarettes, gum, snacks, and drinks, and a lot of people walking about. Our purpose here was to visit Verina, where the tomb of Philip II, father of Alexander the Great, was discovered in the mid-70s. The tumulus, or large mound, where the tomb was found has been maintained in the museum built underground around the original findings. While not as well known as other Greek antiquities, this is significant because of its recent discovery. Something you've seen before, Meteora. From Vergina, we climbed through the mountains on one of Greece's newest freeways to the west, past Kozani, and south to Meteora, the famous rock outcropping topped by monasteries. The town of Kalambaka is the main destination for many tour groups that visit here. Kastraki, a small village up the hill toward the monastery, was our choice. The Kastraki Hotel provided excellent accommodations and price. Our balcony looked directly up at 3 of the 5 monasteries. Again, go to Greece in May or October. The hotel was pleasant and well furnished. However, this place might not be as desirable as about 10 buses went by our window the next morning on the road from Kalambaka. Except for one monastery, visitors must be prepared to traverse a lot of narrow paths along winding stairways. It is utterly amazing to think of how the early hermit monks were able to climb these rocks and live there, let alone construct beautiful structures with primitive materials and tools. Only 2 of the monasteries at the time were active, and the others primarily as museums. Originally, the way these began, hermit monks would somehow climb up into little caves or outcroppings on the mountains, and then lower a rope and a pail to get their supplies up the way. Still, on some of the monasteries, you'll see an outlock handle with a rope and a pail down below, and still some things are brought up that way. However, there are roads and bridges from the back. It's not an easy climb, and if you really want to go there, you better be prepared to do some serious uphill walking. The one monastery we did visit was actually occupied by nuns. It was very clean, open, with a huge garden, and very welcoming. Of course, there's a huge gift shop in each one of these places, and that's one of their main sources of income. After 2 days of driving and climbing, we were ready for our last rest stop. This time on the Pelion Peninsula, just west of Volos. The drive through Larissa and Volos is rather straightforward. However, the Pelion Peninsula rises from sea level to 3,000 feet and down again in a 15-kilometer distance. Thus, the roads are incredibly twisty as they wind through several mountain villages. Skiing is popular in Pelion. I can't explain the road. My son was a new driver at the time we were there, and he had the guts to drive out of Athens, got on some of the main roads, but when we got to Pelion and he looked at the roads going up the hill, he said, "Dad, that's enough." This is the typical road through Pelion. It's incredibly lush. The first time we were there was water flowing down the side of the road after a recent melting of the snow. It just felt so fresh and wonderful. This was our destination, Ayos Ioannis, or St. John in Pelion. Fortunately, this quiet seaside has not changed dramatically because we had been there previously, 13 years prior. The Greek government has declared this as a historic site. Except for a few new hotels and villas built before that designation, it's virtually unchanged. Several restaurants, taverns, tavernas, and shops line the three-block beachfront. Following a major storm in the 90s, the seawall was rebuilt and the beach improved. The area is previously primarily a vacation area for Greeks, many with summer homes here. It also retains much of the flavor of unspoiled walking villages. Few international travelers and fewer groups come here. The hotel we stayed at was only about 4 years old. For 4 days, we enjoyed the hospitality of its owners, strolled a few blocks, rolled on the beach, and visited a few other towns along the coast. While not an easily accessible destination, it's one I favor as it has all the amenities of the more popular island sites. Full of sun, good food, and wine, we left Pelion for a long drive back to Athens over the Parnassus mountain range. In Delphi and the Hostos, you figure out how to do it? Well, I'll let the Blakes talk to you about Ayos Ioannis. When the Blakes first came to University House on a visit, I talked to them, and they subsequently went to Pelion and to Ayos Ioannis. So if you want to have even more of a presentation, they can tell you about it. That's all right. Built on the west slope of Mount Helicon, the monastery is one of the most important ecclesiastical monuments of the Middle Byzantine era in Greece, and dedicated to Osos Lukas. It means undefiled by sin, free from wickedness, religiously observing moral obligation, pure, holy, pious. He was famous at the time for his ability to heal the faithful and foresee the future. Back on the National Road, our trip to Athens was a breeze, but finding the location where we were to meet a friend was a challenge. Fortunately, she waited for us and we were able to spend an enjoyable evening before our next morning departure the next day. My comments at the beginning of this piece may appear critical of Greece in some way. That was not my intention. Rather, my desire is to prepare travelers who are planning to really explore the countryside and the wonderful small towns. This type of exploration will result in some wonderful, though not always predictable, experiences. And by traveling during the spring and fall shoulder seasons and seeing some less popular locations, one could still travel in Greece at a reasonable price. How things may have changed since then, but our time in 2007 was unforgettable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. That's beautiful, beautiful, beautiful scenery. Anyone have comments or questions? How many of you have been to Greece?
How many of you have been to Salonika? Okay, see, that's the difference. How many of you have been to Santorini? Or Mykonos? Yeah. Delphi? Or the Oracle? Or Olympia and the Peloponnese? Yeah, so you've seen some of the sites. But how many have been to Veria? Or Katerini? Or Pelion? That's the other Greece that I want you to explore if you go again. I'm sure there are some people with some stories.
Decided to come here to University House. We were invited to come to dinner, and our dinner was with Joann and John, and they told us about Ioannis, and we went there after we got past the sheep on the road. And I can attest to how beautiful it is and what a beautiful sunset it was over the Aegean. But the sheep continued to go on the road.
As you can see in this picture, look up behind with all the green foliage. This is not what you see usually on the islands. You'll see more arid, scraped off landscapes. But this is why I liked it so much.
I want to share a brief story from Athens. I was riding on the subway and got my pocket picked. And optimistically thought if I go back to where I last paid for something, maybe my wallet is there. It was a little cyber cafe, internet cafe. And I talked to the guy, I told him what had happened, and he said, well, it wasn't a Greek, it was an Albanian. You will probably appreciate that. And he said, so can I help you? And I said, well, I have no money. I literally had no money, no credit cards. Luckily, I had my passport. He said, I will loan you some money. He says, how much do you need? He says, I said, I don't know, to get me to the airport, $75. He says, I'll give you $75. I said, I'll pay you back when I get back to the States. He said, I don't want you to remember Greece in a bad light. And I was really touched.
When I first went to Greece in 1977, what happened is you work, you got your pay in drachmas at that time, before the euro. And you had to go physically to the different places to pay for your rent, for your electricity, for everything else. You had to do that in person. Now the Greeks went quickly from that sort of cash economy to credit cards. And that was a danger because credit cards made it so easy. And the economy kind of went to hell after that because the Greeks had no idea what they were supposed to do. There was a woman who came from Greece and her husband said, you don't need cash, she's going to go shopping. You don't need cash, just take the credit card. So she took the credit card and thought, you know, she could just use it. It wouldn't be a problem. Then the bill came and he said, my God, you spent thousands of dollars. She says, I didn't spend anything, I just used the card.
John, do you speak Greek?
Monologaki, just a little bit.
Okay, so on your travels you did need an interpreter,
Well, yes and no.
or they spoke enough English to...
My sister, my wife and sister-in-law both spoke only Greek till they went to school. Helen, my sister-in-law's Greek is very good. Mine, I grew up listening to Greek, but I flunked out of Greek school. But listening to it over time, by the time I was in Greece for a week, I could understand almost everything. The only thing that happened is a certain word would come up and I'd stop to think about that word, then I'd lose the whole conversation. But the Greek came back to me enough so that I could speak hesitatingly.
Thank you.
You said that there was a lot of time for discussions when you were meeting people. Were the discussions or comments always about the present events or very, very recent events? Or was there any times in which you talked about things like the effect of the Nazis or German occupation of Greece during the Second World War and the impact that had on Greece?
Some of you may know that we have a museum also called Greeks in Washington, where Joann and I went around the state and interviewed over 200 Greeks and Greek Americans and posted their stories online. If you go to Greeks in Washington and look it up, you'll see the website, you'll see the museum. Many of the people that came to this country, when their children would ask about those events, would not talk about them because they were so unpleasant. And so, no, we didn't have those discussions with them. We might have if we had been in more of an academic setting, but when we were just with family and friends, it was more talking about your kids or your grandparents or something else, but the talk about the occupation by the Nazis was not something we came across.
So I want to call your attention to a couple of books that you might find very interesting. The first one is called Eleni by Nicholas Gage. It is the story of a mother and her children during the Greek Civil War. It is riveting, and it talks about their experience and how she got her children out to go to the United States and live with their father. They lived in a very poor village in northern Greece. The men had to go abroad to make their living. The women stayed home and took care of the children. There are two other books. Nicholas Gage wrote a second book about his father's experience suddenly inheriting these children and making a life for them in the United States. And then a third book was written by one of the granddaughters. She went back to the village and restored the family home. So these are books that you might find very, very, very interesting.
Nicholas Gage, Gatsuyanis, not Cage, but Gage, was an investigative reporting for the New York Times on the mafia, criminal justice system. His second book is called A Place for Us, the story of his family relocating in the Massachusetts area, in Boston.
In Worcester.
The third book was by his daughter, not his granddaughter, about restoring the family home in Greece. Eleni, his mother was killed in the war, and very traumatic story. I think, was that also made into a movie? I'm not sure if it was or not. Anyway, those are three very good books.
I went to Greece in, I think, 1961 with a wealthy aunt and uncle. They had stocking factories throughout Europe, and one of them was in Greece. And so we went first class, which I'd never done. I was hitchhiking in Europe, and I joined them in, I forget, London or Paris. And anyway, so we had an opportunity to, we visited Greece, and at that time, the king was a prince. The prince who became a king was, we went to what do you call it, where a child is birthed, water poured in their head. A baptism. And that the prince was the godfather. And so my aunt and uncle were my aunt particularly is very excited about being able to see a prince king. So we went, and we had to stay outside of this little tiny sort of stone chapel, and we'd wait until the prince came driving up. He was known as the sort of playboy prince, I think. Anyway, and he jumped out of the front seat, and the chauffeurs, jumped out of the back seat. And then we could proceed into the chapel. And what I remember is that the prince, or the king, I thought he was a king, and his wife, who was a Danish princess, greeted people in the language that they spoke to him in. So that was one of the big memories that I have of Greece. The other was that when my aunt and uncle had gone to Greece many times, and she had a little book that had all the wines and the food that they'd eaten and so forth. And so we'd go to these restaurants that they knew of, and you would go into the kitchen where you could smell you'd smell the odors of the food, and then you would say, "Oh, I want that one."
Mm-hmm.
And that was another striking thing. And I can't remember the other details, but.
I have a more mundane question. I noticed in many of your slides that the roofs are red. I assume that's some kind of tile or something.
Yeah.
But having visited Santorini, where everything was blue, is that a different, do you know?
I don't know.
I mean, I was so struck by the blue and white in Santorini, and yet most of the buildings we saw on your slides had red roofs.
Um,
Don't know.
Maybe they wanted to replicate the colors of the flag.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Joe?
Yeah.
It's just a really quick memory, but after spending 2 years in India where our clothes were washed in the river, we left New Delhi, and the first place we stopped was Athens. And I just put all our clothes in the laundromat, and I could not believe how white they turned out. And so, though we saw a lot of wonderful things in Athens, it'll always be for me to place great laundromats.
It's amazing what kind of memories you might acquire when you travel. Anyone else? I have a Greek story. I was acquainted with a couple. He was Greek and she was Japanese. Both of them were born here in the U.S., but their parents came from Greece and Japan respectively. One of our other friends told me about their wedding. I didn't know them at the time when they got married, but the story of their wedding was about 15 minutes before the stated time of the ceremony. All of the bride's Japanese friends and relatives were in the church and in their seats and sitting quietly. And just about the time when it was announced that the ceremony would take place, crowds of Greeks, the groom's friends and family, came wandering in, talking and laughing, and found their seats, although they kind of milled around first a lot and had to greet each other at great length with conversations. It was a very, he said it was a very striking depiction of some cultural differences, but their marriage was very happy.
If I'm not mistaken, that was the Crown Hill Cafe in off at 85th and 15th Northwest.
I remember the Crown Hill Cafe, yeah.
That was the daughter of that family. Poulios is her name.
Uh-huh.
And we had a story about her in Greeks in Washington, if you want to see that. She tells a story. She married a guy who worked for the railroad. The granddaughter of that family and her husband had several restaurants. They now have the Old Ballard catering service that catered the memorial service we had for my wife. So that family tradition goes way back.
Okay, and they're still here, and it's still feeding people. Someone told me that it's practically a law that when Greeks come here and move to the United States, they have to open a restaurant.
When two Greeks meet on the street, they open a restaurant.
The hospitality tradition.
Well, it was the easiest way for people, like a lot of immigrants come. You can learn how to wash dishes very easily. It doesn't take a lot of language. But if you're careful and you pay attention to what's going around you, eventually you get some seniority and you eventually save your money and you buy the place and you run the place. So we did a presentation that you can look at Greeks in Washington called A Place for Us. It was a display at Mohi of the Greek restaurants tradition in Washington State and Seattle. Between 1900 and 2015, there were over 300 restaurants in this state operated or owned by Greeks, 200 of which were in the Seattle area at one time or another. Now I think there's almost a handful, just a handful left. Slowly, because the Greek cuisine grew into so many different places and morphed into different places, so now you can get a Greek salad or calamari or any place. There was a place called the Astoria? No. Anyway, a restaurant above East Lake. And they first served the calamari there because originally the only place you got it, the squid was used as bait for fish, but never eaten. And now it's everywhere. Greek salad everywhere.
Yes, they brought calamari to the U.S. palate.
Now, if you want a Greek salad, remember, you don't want a Greek salad, you want a Greek village or choryatiki salad. Because if a salad has lettuce in it, that's not Greek. But if it has the tomatoes and the cucumbers and olives and onions, that's a Greek salad.
Oh, thank you for that tip.
I noticed no one spoke of the islands. Idra comes to mind. It was my husband's birthday on the 22nd of June, and we were on a wonderful trip, sailed quite a lot in 1980. And so when we stopped at Idra, I got off at early morning, and I did a walk, and I could not believe it. All of a sudden, the fragrance of oregano was everywhere. Wild oregano, what? So it was a perfect morning. Cut the oregano, made an egg dish for his birthday.
Joann and I were not able to do a lot of foreign travel. We did a lot of domestic travel, but the one I'm going to present next, when the coach gives me the okay, is on Portugal. And I look forward to doing that.